Welcome back to the deep dive. Before we really get into it today, I want you to actually close your eyes for just a second.
Okay, setting the mood right off the bat.
Yeah, just bear with me. Imagine you are walking down this set of concrete steps in Boston. You reach out, you push open this heavy wooden door, and you're immediately hit with the smell of stale beer.
Maybe a little sawdust on the floor.
Exactly, some sawdust. And you hear the sound of a studio audience or, maybe just a group of really close friends shouting a single name in unison.
It's arguably the most famous basement in television history.
We are, of course, talking about Cheers, but I want to be clear right up front. If you think this is just going to be some light nostalgia trip where we hum the theme song and talk about how funny the jokes were, well, we need to set the stage properly.
Right, because we have a massive stack of documents here. I mean, we're looking at extensive character biographies, deep production notes, casting histories, even psychological profiles of the characters that the writers put together.
It is a heavy stack of paper.
It's heavy. And frankly, it kind of needs to be. Because when you dive into these sources, you realize Cheers wasn't just a sitcom. If you really look at the anatomy of the show, it was this rare lightning-in-a-bottle moment.
The writing, the acting, the cultural timing, it all just aligned perfectly.
Yeah.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to dissect that exact anatomy. We really want to figure out how a washed-up pitcher, a pretentious academic, a pretty cynical waitress, and a couple of neurotic barflies managed to create this surrogate family that basically had America completely obsessed for 11 years.
11 seasons. It's a massive run. And we're going to look at the what-ifs, too, because the source material reveals these crazy casting choices that almost happened.
Oh, the alternate universe Cheers is wild.
It really is. It would have resulted in a completely fundamentally different show.
Right.
It makes for a really fascinating case study because you look at these production notes and you realize that purely on paper, this show probably shouldn't have worked.
Not at all.
It's a show about a group of distinct, often deeply flawed individuals. People who, in literally any other setting in the world, probably wouldn't even speak to each other.
But down in the bar, they are family. So I think we have to start at the center of the universe, right? The gravitational pull of the entire show. The man behind the bar.
Sam Malone.
Sam Malone, the anchor of the whole thing. Now, everybody knows Sam Malone as the cool bartender, the ladies' man. But when I started reading through his official character biography in these notes, I was genuinely surprised by how much sheer tragedy is baked into his backstory.
Yeah, there is a lot being there.
He isn't just a former player. It's a really dark history.
That is a crucial observation to make early on, because it's so easy to just view Sam through the lens of his charm.
Mm-hmm.
But according to the writer's notes, the character is defined almost entirely by lost potential. He isn't just a guy who used to play sports. He's a former relief pitcher for the Boston Red Sox.
Wearing jersey number 16.
Right, number 16. And the sources give us a very specific timeline that really matters for his psychology. He pitched in 1973. He was a member of the 1975 AL champion team.
So he reached the absolute peak.
He was right there.
Yeah.
But here is the key question the notes pose. Why did he stop? It wasn't a blown-out shoulder.
Yeah.
It wasn't old age catching up with him. It was the bottle.
Alcoholism.
Yes. And that is an incredibly heavy backstory for a network sitcom lead in the early 1980s.
It really is. And there's this detail in the production notes that just absolutely stuck out to me. It mentions that he bought the bar in 1977. But the kicker is he bought the bar while he was still actively drinking.
During his drinking days, yes.
Wait, let's just pause on that.
Mm-hmm.
He bought a bar while he was an active alcoholic.
Exactly. Just think about the psychology of a decision like that. The note suggests he didn't buy it as some savvy real estate investment. He bought it because that is where he lived his life. So by the time we actually meet him in the pilot episode, yes, he is the owner, but he is also a recovering alcoholic whose daily job is working in a bar.
Surrounded by the temptation.
Every single day. He is literally surrounding himself with the exact substance that destroyed his major league career.
That is just so intense to think about. It adds this entire layer of daily willpower to the character that I completely missed when I used to just watch the show casually. It almost feels like a form of penance.
He really is penance.
Yeah.
And it completely sets up his specific personality type. He's not an intellectual guy. The show makes a very big deal about the fact that he barely scraped through high school.
Although the notes do say he eventually got his diploma in season 3.
He did, yes.
Yeah.
But he was always a jock first. He openly admits to being unintelligent in the academic sense.
Yeah.
But what he possesses, and I love the phrase the creators used in the outline for this.
Oh, relief pitcher arrogance. I saw that phrase in the notes and I highlighted it. What exactly does that mean in this specific context?
Well, think about what a real-world relief pitcher actually does. They don't start the game. They just sit out there in the bullpen, basically waiting for someone else on their team to fail.
Right.
They only get called in when the situation is completely dire. The bases are loaded, the starting pitcher is falling apart, the game is totally on the line. To succeed in that role, they have to have this icy, almost irrational confidence to just step on the mound, save the day, and then walk off.
Just unshakable swagger.
Exactly. And the writers noted that Sam treats his entire life with that exact same energy. He is not a planner. He doesn't think 5 steps ahead. He just reacts to whatever crisis is in front of him with this immense swagger.
And he definitely brings that swagger to his dating life. I mean, we really have to unpack the womanizing here because Sam Malone is basically the gold standard archetype of the 80s ladies' man.
Oh, absolutely.
He drives the red Corvette. He is just constantly chasing women.
He is.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at it through the lens of the psychological profiles in the source material, this behavior is described as a mixture of exhibitionist narcissism and really deep insecurity.
He desperately needs that validation.
He craves it. He's often dating women who are undeniably beautiful, but perhaps a bit one-dimensional, or they're just there for a good time. He avoids depth.
But there is a code, right? The character bios mention he actually has some standards.
The famous Sam Malone Code, yes. It's detailed in the notes for the episode Sam Turns the Other Cheek, where he explicitly states his ethical line for dating. He actively avoids married, underage, and comatose women.
I mean, the bar is incredibly low, but I suppose at least there is a bar.
It is a tremendously low bar. But it's fascinating because underneath all that bravado and the red Corvette, the biography reveals exactly why he is so insecure. We have to talk about his family dynamics to really understand him, specifically his brother,
Derek Malone.
the unseen Derek. The sources describe Derek as being effortlessly talented. He's handsome, he's a successful international lawyer, he's a total polymath. He is basically better than Sam at absolutely everything.
And how did the parents react to that?
The notes are clear that they heavily favored Derek.
Oh, that stings.
So you have Sam, a guy who actually became a professional athlete. For most families, that's a massive, unbelievable achievement. But in the Malone family, he is still the disappointment. He's just the bartender.
So every time he chases a woman or shows off his car or tells a story about the Red Sox, he is subconsciously trying to prove to the world that he has worth.
Precisely.
That makes him so much more sympathetic than just reading him as a guy who likes to go on dates. But here is where it gets really interesting for me, and this brings us to the casting history. Because when you say the name Sam Malone, you just immediately see Ted Danson. It is physically impossible to separate the actor from the character, but the production notes say the role wasn't written for him at all.
No, not even close to it. The original concept for Sam Malone wasn't a baseball player. The creators originally wrote the character as a former football player, specifically a wide receiver for the New England Patriots.
A football player. That changes his entire physical presence.
It changes everything. And because of that original vision, the casting directors were looking at actual, real-life football players to cast in the lead role.
Like who? Who was actually on the list?
Well, the notes show that Fred Dryer was the absolute frontrunner.
Fred Dryer. Wait, is that the guy who ended up playing the sportscaster Dave Richards on the show later on?
The very same guy. Before acting, he was a defensive end for the LA Rams. He was a legitimate, high-level professional athlete. And he was shortlisted for the role of Sam because he naturally possessed that exact physical presence and authentic locker room energy they thought they wanted.
So why didn't he get it? What shifted?
It all came down to chemistry. The producers were auditioning actresses for the role of Diane at the exact same time. And the notes explain that when they finally put Ted Danson in a room to read with Shelley Long, the energy in the room just fundamentally shifted.
It just clicked.
It did. Danson had this underlying vulnerability that the actual football players just didn't quite capture. He could play the arrogance, sure, but you could also see a genuine sadness in his eyes.
Thank goodness they paid attention to that chemistry check. But speaking of Ted Danson, there is a literal secret about his physical appearance that I found deep in the production notes. I had absolutely no idea about this.
Oh, are you referring to the hair situation?
I am. I mean, I always thought he just had that naturally great, thick head of hair. It's iconic.
Well, he did have great hair, but he needed a little bit of help. It is a well-documented fact in the casting and production history that Ted Danson wore a hairpiece to cover a bald spot on the crown of his head during filming.
That is just wild to me. Did they ever actually address it on the show, or was it a strict backstage secret?
They actually did address it on screen. Not immediately, of course, but much later in the series. There's a specific episode where Sam physically takes off the hairpiece to show his vulnerability to someone.
Wow.
The notes highlight it as this brilliant meta moment where the actor's actual reality bled directly into the character's narrative. It was a way of showing the audience that even Sam Malone, this supposedly perfect physical specimen, was aging and dealing with insecurity.
I love that they leaned into it. So we have our anchor, Sam. But as we established, a relief pitcher needs a batter to throw against. You cannot have a successful television show with just a cool guy hanging out in his own bar. You desperately need conflict. And that brings us to our second section, Diane Chambers.
The ultimate foil. The spark that lights the whole thing up.
The pilot episode, which is called Give Me a Ring Sometime, sets this dynamic up just so perfectly. Diane isn't casually walking into a bar to get a drink with friends. She doesn't want to be in this basement at all.
No, she is there with her fiancé, Professor Sumner Sloan. And the notes detail just how tragic this initial setup is. She is completely, totally out of her element. She is sitting there anticipating catching a flight to the Caribbean for a romantic wedding.
And instead, Sumner just leaves her there.
He completely abandons her. He goes right back to his ex-wife. So Diane is left stranded in this gritty basement bar with no job, no money, no fiancé, and a highly specific skill set that is entirely academic.
She has absolutely no real-world survival skills.
None. So she is forced by sheer circumstance to take a job as a waitress in a place that she openly considers to be vastly beneath her station in life.
And that class clash is the entire engine of the show for those first 5 seasons. We're talking about a woman who went to Bennington College, she went to Boston University. She constantly quotes obscure poetry. And she is taking orders from Sam, a guy who, as the writer's notes joke, probably thinks War and Peace is a heavy book simply because of its physical weight.
Exactly. The producers explicitly noted that they modeled this core relationship on those classic Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn movies.
Films like Woman of the Year.
Right. It's that precise mixture of intense romance and biting antagonism. They completely drive each other crazy. They insult each other's intelligence. But there is this undeniable magnetic pull between them that they can't ignore.
It really was the original television blueprint for the will they, won't they dynamic. But when you actually sit down and look at the summary of their relationship timeline in the sources, it wasn't just playful flirting. It was actually kind of deeply toxic, wasn't it?
Oh, it was incredibly volatile. The notes describe it as a cycle of mutual destruction. The sources outline this recurring pattern. They manage to get close. One of them gets deeply insecure about the class difference or their past. They lash out verbally, and then they have a spectacular breakup.
The fallout is always huge. I mean, look at the end of season 2. Their breakup is so catastrophic that it actually sends Sam into a full-blown relapse.
Right, which goes back to our earlier point about his alcoholism.
Yeah.
It is very dark material.
Yeah.
And Diane's consequence is just as severe. She ends up checking into a psychiatric hospital because of the severe emotional stress of their relationship.
That is a remarkably heavy plot line for a romantic comedy couple.
It really pushes the boundaries of the sitcom format.
And ironically, according to the character bios, that psychiatric hospital stay is exactly where she meets Fraser Crane. But we will definitely get to them a bit later. So Sam and Diane go back and forth for years. Failed proposals, bitter rejections. It really feels like they are doomed to just torture each other forever. But then season 5 happens.
The pivotal season. The episode I Do To You.
They are finally standing at the altar.
They are. It genuinely looks like the show is going to finally give the fans exactly what they've been begging for. And then Diane gets a once-in-a-lifetime chance to finish her novel.
Or she just leaves.
She leaves him to pursue her writing career. Right. And looking at the historical context in the production notes, this was a massive industry-shaking deal at the time. Shelley Long deciding to leave the show was front-page national news.
People must have been terrified the show was going to tank.
They genuinely thought it would die without that central dynamic, because for the general public, Sam and Diane literally were the show.
But she did eventually come back for the series finale 6 years later. And reading through the nights on the finale, I think the way the writers handled that reunion says so much about the show's overall philosophy.
It's brilliant.
Because they almost get back together. They are holding hands. They're planning to pack up and move to Los Angeles together. And then they don't do it. Why didn't they?
Because in the final moments, they both realize that they are simply better off apart. It is a very mature, albeit incredibly bittersweet, conclusion to their saga. The writers clearly understood that raw passion just isn't enough to sustain a functional life together.
It's a hard truth.
Sam ultimately belongs to the bar, and Diane fundamentally belongs to her art, or at least her lifelong pursuit of it. If they had actually stayed together and moved to LA, they would have just destroyed each other all over again.
It is such a brave choice for a sitcom finale. Most shows would just force the happy ending to appease the audience.
But this was the honest ending. It respected who the characters had become.
Okay, let's step away from the heavy drama of the back office and the romance for a minute, because you can't have a deep dive into Cheers without talking about the people permanently sitting on the stools.
The lifeblood of the bar.
We have to talk about the barflies. And we absolutely have to start with the man whose very name is literally the main sound effect of the entire show.
Norm.
Norm Peterson, or, as I actually learned for the first time from reading his character bio, Hillary Norman Peterson.
Yes, Hillary. The sad sack accountant who is essentially a structural fixture of the bar itself.
Now, I just always assumed Norm was part of the original master plan from day one. He's just too iconic not to be, but the casting notes say otherwise.
This is genuinely one of my favorite what-ifs in the entire stack of documents.
Yeah.
Norm was not in the original script. Not his regular character, anyway. George Wendt came in and auditioned for a minor throwaway role named George.
Okay, and how big was the role?
He had exactly one line in the pilot script.
One line? What was it?
He was supposed to be Diane's very first customer. She walks over, asks him what he wants to drink, and his only line was just the word beer.
That's it, just the word beer.
Just beer. But the casting notes say he delivered that single word with such a specific, desperate, yet strangely joyful energy that the producers just burst out laughing in the room.
They saw the magic immediately.
They realized right then and there, we need to see this guy sitting at this bar every single day.
Yeah.
So they took that energy and expanded the one-line role into the character of Norm Peterson.
That is the ultimate testament to the power of an actor's delivery. And of course, you really can't talk about Norm without talking about the other most important woman in his life, the one we never actually get to see, the unseen wife. It became one of the show's absolute longest-running dags. Norm constantly complains about her. He makes these really harsh jokes about her weight and her family. She is very often the punchline of his entrance into the bar.
She is. But the interesting psychological question the writers posed is he actually a bad husband? Or is that just typical bar talk?
Right, the bravado of the basement. What do the character notes say?
That's where the nuance comes in. The sources point out that despite all the constant jokes, and despite having several very real opportunities to cheat on her over 11 years, Norm never actually does. He is oddly, fiercely loyal to Vera.
He just complains to cope.
He loves her in his own highly specific way. He really prefers to be sitting at the bar rather than being at home.
Now, there is a production note here about Vera actually appearing on screen exactly once. Did I miss an episode?
You might have watched it and still missed it because you didn't actually get to see her face. It happens in the famous episode, Thanksgiving Orphans. There is this massive, chaotic food fight involving the whole cast.
Oh, I remember the food fight.
Right. Well, right in the middle of it, Vera finally comes to the front door and she gets it squarely in the face with a pumpkin pie the literal second the door opens.
Okay, we literally only see a pie-covered face.
Exactly. Over the years, we see her legs occasionally, we hear her voice muffled off screen, but the face always remains a total mystery. It's just a brilliant production trick to keep the joke alive for a decade.
And we should briefly mention his career trajectory, too, because for a guy whose entire brand is sitting motionless on a stool, he actually moved around professionally quite a bit.
He did have an arc. He started the series as an accountant, very corporate, wearing a suit, incredibly miserable. But the show carefully tracks his gradual drift. He loses the accounting job, becomes a house painter, and eventually pivots into being an interior decorator.
Which is such a funny shift.
It's a slow, deliberate slide into less corporate, less demanding work. And the psychological notes point out that this perfectly fits his ultimate desire to have complete control over his own schedule, mainly so he can guarantee he has more time to spend at Cheers.
Priorities. And sitting right next to him, usually aggravating him to no end, is the man who knows a little bit about everything and absolutely a lot about nothing at all, Cliff Clavin.
The mail carrier. The ultimate knowledge dispenser.
Now, John Ratzenberger, the actor who played Cliff this, is yet another case of an actor just creating a legendary role, essentially out of thin air, right?
Absolutely. The casting history notes detail this amazing story. Ratzenberger originally came in and auditioned for a completely different part. Some sources think it might have even been for the Norm role. But he read for it. And as he was walking out of the audition room, he sensed he wasn't going to get the job.
So what did he do?
So, with his hand literally on the doorknob, he turned back to the producers and asked them a question.
What did he ask?
He asked if they had written a bar know-it-all.
He just pitched the character right there on the spot.
He did. He told them, look, every single bar in New England has that one guy who sits in the corner and pretends to be an absolute expert on everything in the world, even though he clearly has no idea what he's talking about.
And the producers bought it.
The producers looked at each other and realized they actually didn't have that specific archetype in the script. They needed him.
That is just genius self-advocacy. And originally, the notes say they were going to make this character a security guard, right?
Yes, that was the first draft of Cliff. But they quickly changed his profession to a postman. And the writer's reasoning for this is just hilarious. They thought that postmen were generally perceived by the public as more knowledgeable simply because they are out walking the neighborhood every day.
They see the whole town.
Right, they see things, they meet people. It gave Cliff this thin, plausible reason to constantly believe he knew everything about the community and the world at large.
And Cliff certainly thinks he's worldly. But underneath all that trivia and the uniform, the bios highlight that he is deeply, deeply insecure.
Oh, incredibly insecure. The notes mention he constantly wishes he was a tough Marine, but he couldn't get in because he has flat feet. He still is at home with his mother, Esther Clavin.
Oh,
The mother-son dynamic is huge for understanding Cliff. It explains his extreme awkwardness around women, his general arrested development. He is basically a guy desperately trying to project this worldly bravado just to mask the fact that he's still essentially a frightened little boy living in his childhood bedroom.
But he did have his one shining moment of ultimate glory. We have to talk about the Jeopardy episode. I feel like this specific half hour is just permanently etched into television history.
The episode title is What Is? Cliff Clavin. And yes, it is absolutely legendary.
So he actually manages to get cast on the real show, Jeopardy, within the fictional universe of Cheers.
He does. Alex Trebek is there and everything. And the incredibly funny thing is, he's actually doing incredibly well. The episode notes say he racks up $22,000 by the end of the first 2 rounds.
He is just destroying the competition.
Because the categories on the board just happen to align perfectly with his bizarre, specific, trivial knowledge. He has an absolute mathematical lock on the game. No one can catch him.
And then comes Final Jeopardy.
And he bets it all. He absolutely does not need to do this. He just needs to bet a single dollar to secure the win. But his ego takes over, and he bets every single penny.
And what was the clue? Let's get it exact.
The clue was Archibald Leach, Bernard Schwartz, and Lucille Lesueur.
And the correct answer.
The correct response is, who are Cary Grant, Tony Curtis, and Joan Crawford. Those are their real birth names.
And Cliff, in all his wisdom, answers.
Who are 3 people who have never been in my kitchen.
Which, I mean, you have to admit is technically true.
It is entirely technically true, but shockingly, Alex Trebek did not accept it as a valid response. So Cliff loses everything. And the cultural impact of this was so huge that it actually inspired a term in the real world among hardcore Jeopardy fans.
Wait, really? What's the term?
It's called Clavin's Rule, which basically means if you have an insurmountable lead going into Final Jeopardy, don't be an idiot and bet everything. Just bet enough to win.
That is painful, but so fitting. Now, speaking of strange rules and legalities, there is a very weird, real-life legal battle involving Cliff and Norm that I saw mentioned in the production history. It's referred to as the robot lawsuit. And honestly, this sounds like something I am completely making up.
Oh, I assure you, this is a very real, very fascinating piece of intellectual property history. In 1993, actors George Wendt and John Ratzenberger actually filed a lawsuit against a massive corporation called Host International.
Host International, they run a lot of those airport bars and restaurants, right?
Exactly. They had secured the rights to set up airport bars that were themed after Cheers. And as part of the decor, they installed 2 life-size animatronic robots in these bars.
Oh, no.
One was a heavy-set guy who sat at the end of the bar, and the other was a guy wearing a blue postal uniform.
Very subtle.
Extremely subtle. Now, legally, they didn't name these robots Norm and Cliff. They gave them generic names like Hank and Bob. But they look remarkably like the actors, and they were programmed to chatter back and forth just like them.
So the actual actors sued the company.
They did.
Yeah.
And their legal argument was that this violated their personality rights. Now, this is a very distinct legal concept. It wasn't a standard copyright claim because the television studio legally owned the fictional characters of Norm Peterson and Cliff Clavin.
Right, the studio owns the intellectual property.
But Wendt and Ratzenberger were arguing, you aren't just using the script. You are using our literal physical likenesses as real human beings to sell beer in an airport.
That is a brilliant argument. Did they end up winning the case?
Well, the legal battle dragged on for years. Eventually, they ended up settling out of court for an undisclosed amount. But it remains a landmark case in entertainment law because it helped establish the precedent that an actor's specific physical portrayal and identity is somewhat separate from the written character on the page.
Robots in an airport bar causing landmark legal precedent. That truly feels like something Cliff would have a little-known fact about.
Oh, he would definitely bore the entire bar with a 20-minute speech about personality rights.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered the front of the house, the romance, and the barflies. Now we really need to talk about the spark plug of the show, the absolute firebrand, Carla Tortelli.
Played brilliantly by Rhea Perlman.
The casting notes say she was actually the very first actor officially hired for the ensemble. She was cast before Ted Danson, before Shelley Long.
That's right. The creators knew they absolutely needed her specific energy immediately to ground the show. Because Carla is the complete antithesis of the typical television waitress archetype.
She is definitely not service with a smile.
Not at all. She is deeply cynical. She is fiercely superstitious. She is openly aggressive to the customers. And as the show makes a point of highlighting constantly, she is incredibly fertile.
The fertility is a massive ongoing plot point. I mean, the bio says she starts the pilot episode with 4 kids, and by the series finale, she has a total of 8.
It's a huge running gag. The joke is basically that if she even makes eye contact with a man, she gets pregnant. And interestingly, the production notes point out that Rhea Perlman's actual real-life pregnancies were directly written into the show's storylines.
That's a great way to handle it.
Yeah, so whenever Carla was pregnant on screen, Rhea was usually pregnant in real life.
Her home life sounds like absolute unmitigated chaos. We have to talk about the men in her life that caused this chaos. Starting with the infamous ex-husband, Nick Tortelli.
Played by Dan Hedaya.
Yeah.
And he is the embodiment of sleaze. He wears the deeply unbuttoned shirts, the chest hair, the gold chains. He's a total con man.
But despite all that, Carla is still wildly obsessed with him in this very weird, toxic way.
It's described in the notes as this primal, almost animalistic attraction that she just can't shake. He eventually moves on and gets remarried to a much younger woman named Loretta.
Loretta's great.
She's this sweet, very naive blonde who is essentially the exact opposite of Carla's dark energy. And the network actually gave Nick and Loretta their own spin-off show called The Tortellis.
I have to be honest, I completely forgot about that spinoff until I read these notes.
You and most of America.
Yeah.
It was canceled very, very quickly. But it just shows how distinct and powerful those specific characters were that the network thought they could carry their own series.
But the real tragedy for Carla, and honestly, some of the darkest comedy in the entire series comes with her second husband, Eddie LeBecq.
The French-Canadian hockey goalie.
This entire storyline is just wild. So he's a professional goalie for the Boston Bruins. He and Carla fall madly in love, but they share this massive flaw. They are both incredibly paralyzingly superstitious.
Right. And their shared superstition is that if things are going too well in Eddie's personal life, he plays terribly on the ice. So they develop this insane dynamic where they have to actively stage breakups or get into massive screaming matches right before his games just so he can maintain his winning streak.
That is exhausting. And then we have to talk about the Zamboni incident.
It remains one of the most utterly bizarre character deaths in sitcom history. Eddie LeBecq is tragically killed by an ice resurfacer, a Zamboni, while heroically trying to save a teammate's life on the ice.
It is incredibly tragic, but the show manages to play it with that highly specific, very dark Cheers humor. But the real twist happens at the funeral. I did not see this coming at all when I was reading the episode summary.
Oh, the funeral scene. Yeah. This is classic, terrible Carla luck. She's standing there at the funeral, deeply mourning her beloved husband, and suddenly another grieving woman shows up.
Another wife.
Another wife. Her name is Gloria, and she also has twins.
Wait, so Eddie was a full-blown bigamist?
He was a bigamist. He had an entire secret second family living on the side the whole time.
That is just devastating. Carla finally, after all these years, finds a decent guy, gets slowly run over by a Zamboni, and then it turns out his entire life was a lie.
And that, psychologically speaking, is exactly why Carla is the way she is. The world just constantly keeps kicking her down, so her defense mechanism is to kick back twice as hard. That deep-seated bitterness made her such a mathematically necessary ingredient in the show's chemistry.
You really need that balance.
You do. You had Sam's endless charm, you had Diane's naive optimism, and then you had Carla's absolute grounding cynicism acting as an anchor to keep the show from ever getting too sweet or sentimental.
It really is a perfect structural balance, but that balance inevitably had to shift. Cheers ran for 11 very long seasons. Cast members left, new ones had to come in. We titled this next section The Replacements, but some of these characters became total television legends in their own right.
Oh, absolutely. The evolution of the ensemble cast is really what kept the show on the air for over a decade. The notes make it clear that if the producers had just tried to replace departing actors with cheap clones of the old characters, the show would have failed instantly. Instead, they smartly pivoted.
Let's start with the saddest off-screen transition, the real-life loss of Coach It.
Nicholas Colasanto. He played Coach Ernie Pantusso. He was arguably the emotional heart of the bar in those critical early seasons. He played the dumb guy archetype, but he possessed this profound, almost innocent wisdom.
And he tragically died in real life right after season 3.
It was a massive, devastating blow to the cast and crew. He was a genuine father figure to everyone on set.
So the producers had an impossible task. They had to fill that specific second bartender slot, and their answer was to bring in Woody Boyd.
Enter Woody Harrelson. Now, the easy, lazy thing to do would have been to just cast another older, slightly senile former baseball player to replicate Coach's dynamic with Sam. But they went in the complete opposite direction. They brought in a 20-something kid, a wildly naive farm boy from Hanover, Indiana.
It was such a brilliant pivot, because Woody wasn't dumb in the exact same way Coach was confused by age. Woody was just completely, utterly innocent to the ways of the world. He simply didn't understand sarcasm or city life.
Right. And to emotionally bridge the gap for the audience, the writers established that Woody was actually pen pals with Coach. That was his organic connection to the bar. He took a bus to Boston to finally meet his pen pal, found out the heartbreaking news that he had died, and Sam, out of loyalty to Coach, gave Woody a job.
And Woody's character arc over the series is pretty wild. He goes from this wide-eyed farm boy to eventually marrying Kelly Gaines, who is basically sheltered, incredibly wealthy heiress.
The comedic contrast between Woody and Kelly is absolute gold. Kelly is extremely sheltered by her wealth, while Woody is just a simple farm boy. But at their core, they're both very simple, very sweet people. And eventually the arc concludes with Woody actually getting elected to the Boston City Council. It's this classic, absurd American success story that happens completely by accident.
Then we have Fraser Crane. Now, looking at the casting notes, Fraser was never supposed to stick around, was he?
No, not at all. Kelsey Grammer was originally brought in essentially as a temporary plot device. He was just supposed to be a rebound romance for Diane, designed purely to make Sam jealous for a few episodes. He was the pretentious psychiatrist. The writers fully intended for him to get dumped and disappear.
So why did he end up staying for decades?
Because Kelsey Grammer was just too incredibly good in the role. The notes say he could deliver these incredibly long, complex, eloquent, pompous speeches, but somehow make them hilarious rather than annoying. And the writers quickly realized that he fit perfectly into the ecosystem as a completely different kind of barfly.
He contrasted with Norm and Cliff.
Exactly. He wasn't a working-class guy. He added this entirely new upper-crust flavor to the basement.
And then, to make him even better, they brought in Lilith.
Lilith Sternin, played by Baby Newirth, the notoriously stern psychiatrist.
Their dynamic together is just iconic. It is so incredibly cold.
It is freezing cold, highly analytical, but somehow underneath it all, deeply passionate. They're the ultimate intellectual power couple from hell. They speak to each other in full paragraphs. They clinically analyze their own physical attraction in real time while it's actively happening.
And they eventually get married and have a son, Frederick.
Right. And even though they eventually divorce, which of course perfectly sets up the premise for the Frasier spinoff, their joint presence on Cheers significantly elevated the overall vocabulary and the comedic tone of the show.
And finally, we have to talk about the biggest replacement of all. Shelley Long decides to leave. The show loses its primary female lead. Who steps in to fill that massive void?
Rebecca Howe, played by Kirstie Alley.
The writers dubbed her the anti-Diane.
Exactly. The notes state clearly that they did not want to cast another academic. They definitely didn't want another overqualified waitress, so they brought in an ambitious businesswoman. She works for this massive conglomerate called the Lillian Corporation, and she actually takes over ownership of the bar.
So she becomes Sam's boss.
That is the crucial power shift. Suddenly, Sam is no longer the undisputed king of his own castle. He is just an employee. And Rebecca is tough, she's corporate, she wears the aggressive shoulder pads at first.
At first is definitely the key phrase there, because her character changes so drastically.
Her character devolution is one of the most fascinating arcs in the notes. She starts season 6 as this icy, untouchable corporate climber. But as the seasons progress, the writers realize that Kirstie Alley is incredibly gifted at physical comedy and playing panic.
She is so funny when she's stressed.
Right. So Rebecca slowly morphs into this deeply neurotic, highly insecure disaster of a human being who becomes entirely obsessed with marrying rich men.
The notorious gold digger phase.
Yes, she is just constantly chasing high society status. Her painful obsession with her corporate boss, Evan Drake, is agonizing to watch. And then, of course, the whole saga of Robin Colcord.
Robin Colcord, the billionaire.
Played by Roger Rees. He is this dashing, incredibly mysterious, jet-setting billionaire. Rebecca truly thinks she has finally made it to the top. But then the rug is pulled out, and it turns out he's a massive white-collar criminal.
He actually goes to federal prison, right?
He goes to jail, loses every dime of his money, and is reduced to being a total pauper. But Rebecca wasted so much time and dignity chasing that specific illusion of wealth.
And the really interesting dynamic shift with Sam is that, unlike Diane, Rebecca constantly rejects him.
Exactly. With Diane, Sam was always chasing her intellect and trying to drag her down to his level. With Rebecca, Sam is mostly just chasing her physically, but she rejects him flat out because he is the help. He's just a bartender. He is financially beneath her corporate aspirations.
It totally flipped the traditional television power dynamic. It finally allowed Sam to be the one who wasn't in total control of the romantic situation.
It did. And more importantly, the notes suggest it allowed Sam to naturally age. He wasn't just the effortlessly cool guy anymore. He was an aging, former athlete, trying to figure out his diminishing place in a rapidly changing corporate world.
Now, a truly great bar isn't just made up of the staff and the daily regulars. It's the entire neighborhood, the extended universe of Cheers. There are some incredible recurring characters in these notes that just add so much specific flavor to the show. We absolutely have to give a shout out to Harry the Hat.
Harry Anderson,
Yeah.
the resident magician and local con artist.
He was such a highly specific, weird character. He would just waltz in and trick the regular patrons out of their money with these incredibly elaborate bar bets.
Oh, like the classic, I bet you $20 I can drink that shot of whiskey without physically touching the hat covering it. That kind of classic grift.
But the funny thing is, the bar regulars loved him anyway.
Because he was their con artist. It's a tribal thing. He was almost framed as a chaotic good character. Whenever Cheers had a problem, he would often use his deceptive powers to help the gang defend themselves against their local rivals.
And speaking of local rivals, we definitely have to talk about Gary's Old Town Tavern.
The ultimate nemesis. Gary's was basically everything. Cheers wasn't. It was wildly successful, supposedly had great food, and it was a very modern sports bar.
The Bar Wars episodes are absolute television classics.
They're the best. It was an annual tradition, Cheers versus Gary's. They competed in bowling tournaments, basketball games, even Bloody Mary mixing contests.
Yeah.
And the running joke was that Cheers almost always lost. They were the lovable losers. Gary was just always one step ahead and outsmarted them.
Well, except for when they deployed Harry the Hat.
Exactly. There's that legendary storyline where Harry helps the Cheers gang execute a massive con that basically destroys Gary's entire bar. It was a completely vicious business rivalry, but the writers used it perfectly to bond the dysfunctional Cheers gang together against a common enemy.
And then right upstairs from the basement, you had Melville's.
The incredibly snooty fine dining restaurant,
Mm-hmm.
owned by the insufferable John Allen Hill.
He was a much later addition to the cast, right?
Yes, towards the later seasons, he was the building's landlord.
Mm.
And he had this endlessly combative relationship with Sam, arguing mostly over petty things like rent increases, customer bathroom access, and parking spots.
Mm.
But he also developed a very strange, highly aggressive sexual relationship with Carla.
Which thoroughly disgusted everyone else in the bar.
Visibly nauseated them. It was just another bizarre layer of that enemy with benefits dynamic the show loved to play with.
And we absolutely cannot wrap up the cast list without mentioning the ultimate background guys, Al and Phil.
The literal furniture of the bar. Al had that incredibly distinct, gravelly voice. They rarely had their own huge storylines, but they were just always physically there in the frame. The notes emphasize how crucial they were for world building. It reinforced the idea that this was a real operating business.
Yeah.
If you walked into Cheers on a random Tuesday afternoon, Al would be there. If you walked in on a Friday night, Al would be there.
So we've unpacked the entire roster. We've looked at the fallen pitcher, the academic princess, the sad sack barflies, and all the replacements. When you step back from this massive stack of source material and look at the 11-year picture, what is the core takeaway? Why did this highly specific mix of damaged people resonate so hard with the American public?
I really think it just comes right back down to the core promise of the theme song. You want to go where everybody knows your name. The writers fundamentally designed the bar to be a sanctuary.
A sanctuary for losers.
In a very real way, yes. Just look at the objective facts of their lives. Sam is a recovering alcoholic dealing with a failed baseball career. Diane is a deeply insecure failed writer who couldn't cut it in the academic world. Norm is a completely failed accountant who actively hides from his own wife. Cliff is socially incompetent and lives with his mother. Their marriages constantly fail, their chosen careers completely stall out. But the physical bar itself is the one constant in their lives. It's the one place on earth where all of that external failure simply doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You walk down those concrete stairs and you are immediately accepted unconditionally. You become part of the tribe.
That is actually a really beautiful way to look at it. It is a profoundly dysfunctional family, but at the end of the day, it is a family.
Precisely. The core theme of the show is about the deep human comfort of belonging, even if you feel like you don't fit in anywhere else in society.
Before we completely wrap up today, though, I do want to leave you with a thought, and honestly, a pretty provocative question that really struck me while I was reading through the psychological profile of Sam Malone and just thinking about the modern world. We spent a lot of time talking about his womanizing, his so-called code, his relief pitcher arrogance.
Right, the core of his character.
If Cheers were somehow made today in exactly the same way it was written back then, how do you think we would actually view Sam Malone?
Oh, that is the million-dollar provocative question.
I mean, let's just look at the raw facts. He was the boss of the business, and he was constantly, relentlessly hitting on his own female employees, first Diane, then Rebecca. He was aggressively hitting on his customers. He basically used his own place of business as a personal hunting ground. Now, in the 1980s, he was portrayed on screen as the charming rogue. He was the undisputed hero of the story.
He was. He was the cool guy every guy wanted to be.
But today, if we look at those exact same actions through the modern lens of workplace harassment and corporate power dynamics, is he actually a predator?
It is a very complicated television legacy. The reality is, if you aired those exact early episodes today on network television without any historical context, Sam's behavior would absolutely be flagged as incredibly problematic. He crosses professional lines constantly. He frequently doesn't take no for an answer on the first try. He actively manipulates workplace situations to isolate women.
But the framing of the show tells the audience it's romantic.
It does. And that is the massive difference in the cultural lens. In the 80s, that relentless chase was broadly seen by society as romantic persistence. It was flattering. Today, we have a much clearer understanding that when your literal boss chases you romantically, it's not cute romance. It is the definition of a hostile work environment.
It really changes how you watch the older episodes, doesn't it?
It definitely adds a layer of friction. But it doesn't mean the show itself isn't still incredibly funny or masterfully written. It just means you have to acknowledge that you are watching a very specific time capsule of gender dynamics that have fortunately evolved quite a bit since 1982. You can still appreciate the character's internal struggle and Ted Danson's undeniable charm, while also openly acknowledging that, yeah, a modern HR department would absolutely have a field day with Sam Malone in 2026.
A modern HR department would have that basement bar shut down and boarded up in about a week.
Without a single doubt in my mind, the lawsuits would be astronomical.
Just something interesting for you to mull over the next time you hear that iconic piano intro start playing on a rerun. And that is going to do it for this deep dive into the anatomy of Cheers. We really hope you enjoyed dissecting this incredibly dysfunctional TV family with us. Thanks for listening.